Amen.
One kula I'm going to give to you tonight is that water is always kosher. You don't have to worry about water, even carbonated water. Thank you very much for coming out tonight to hear all about, they entitled the shir, What's on the Menu for the Summer. And I'd like to expound upon this topic. Last year in the shul, I did talk about many of the issues that I'm going to talk about tonight, so please raise your hand if you were at that session. Okay, so it seems like the majority wasn't, and therefore the minority will forgive me if I repeat certain fundamental concepts which I feel have to be learned before we can take the next step. And I'd like to do it all within the next 45 minutes or so. Okay. Yasher Koyach to the host, to the Shul Shomer Shabbos, and thank you to Mrs. O'Hayen for organizing the shir. I was downtown today, and I was meeting with a couple of members of the office, as well as a non-Jew, and I realized that I was going to have time during the meeting with which I probably wouldn't be able to answer messages, and I was out of range, so I brought a little pocket Gemara, about that size, which I bought the last time I was in Yerushalayim for about, the whole shas for about 200 shekel, which is the equivalent of about $50. So as we were leaving, one of my colleagues in the room mentioned to the non-Jew, to the Gentile, he says, "You see that little book that rabbi's holding?" So the non-Jew says, "Yes." He says, "That's the Talmud." So he says, "Wow, this fellow is a lawyer." He says, "Oh, you still learn the Talmud?" So he said, "Yeah, we still learn the Talmud." So one of the fellows there in the room commented, many people think of the Talmud as this large, these big, large, dusty volumes, somewhat archaic and ancient. And here you see that you have a handheld Talmud, a pocket Talmud. He's using it. He's learning it even downtown in between meetings. While the Gemara is somewhat, I'll call it cryptic or difficult to learn, certainly enjoyable, its concepts are definitely applicable, and applicable even to modern technology and modern formats of food service and food product development. And we see, as the years go on, each and every invention or different type of service, and any of the items we're going to be talking about tonight, all of the ancient, quote-unquote, concepts of the Gemara are still very highly applicable and need to be adapted and further adapted to everything that we encounter on the street. And it's a great challenge for us, for Kashrus professionals, to look at the world from a modern perspective through the eyes of modern technology and modern food production, and have in our heads the Gemara, which Hashem gave us, and be able to combine the two. And it's a tremendous challenge, and tonight's topics, we will try to further apply these concepts to items which are somewhat unclear in the eyes of the public. I'm sure people came here tonight to hear what they are allowed to do, and not what they're not allowed to do. And that's fair, and that's why I'm here. I work for the COR. I'm here to give you information. I'm not your rabbi, and I'm not going to give you a musar shmuz. So we're here tonight to talk about the practical applications of Kashrus in an unsupervised world. By unsupervised, I mean there are plenty of establishments of all different kinds. There's about 165 food service establishments just in the city of Toronto, and we're very proud of them, certified kosher by the COR. Yet, people are always asking the question, what can I buy in an unsupervised establishment? And before answering the question, I'm always wondering in the back of my head, why do you need to go to an unsupervised establishment if you can go to a supervised establishment? But again, I'm not here as your madrich. I'm here to give you the facts and the information and what is okay and what is not okay. The first and basic fundamental concept that you have to know and you have to live by when entering a store, whether it's to buy something as simple as a Slurpee from 7-Eleven, unsupervised, or it's a freshly squeezed booster juice, unsupervised, or a coffee shop like Starbucks and Second Cup, a frozen yogurt shop, Yogurties, what's the other one called? Yogurty, Menchie's. Wherever you're walking into, whether you're on vacation, you want to know what you can buy from the treif restaurants, what you can get in a supermarket where there's no hasherim, you have to realize one thing. You are the mashgiach. That's where it begins, and that's where it ends. You're the mashgiach. So you'll say to me, but I have no training. You know, okay, I know how to run a kitchen, I know how to run my own kitchen, but I have no training in food manufacturing or food production, so how can I be the mashgiach? My answer is, that's your problem. I'm here to help you, and I'm here to give you the tools to understand the basics, the ABCs, of what goes on in many of these environments. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you are the mashgiach. So you will not be able to blame the COR for anything that goes in your mouth. You know, somebody once commented to me, he said, you know, I eat this and this and this and that from this hashgacha. I said, really? You know that the COR doesn't allow it. So he says, yeah, but it's not my responsibility, it's the responsibility of the Kashrus agency. I said, really? So he says, yeah, after 120 years, when Hashem asks me why exactly I ate this, I'm going to say it's not my responsibility, it's the responsibility of the Kashrus agency. So it's a fair point, and I won't go into that. But the bottom line is, when you're going into an unsupervised establishment, the responsibility is yours. Does anybody know what the most popular Kashrus certification in the world is? And by the most popular, I mean the certification that gives the most hashgachas in the world.
OU.
The OU. Everybody says the OU. Not the COR?
Nope.
No? Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Too Canadian.
It's not true. It's not the COR and it's not the OU. But everybody else does it. That hashgacha. But my friend with the beard, he goes there and eats. But my friend, she's so frum, she wouldn't eat there if it wasn't okay. But I saw at least 10 people that looked frum eating in that shop. It must be kosher, so I didn't bother looking at the Tuudah. There's many, many horror stories that cross my desk when people take that approach. So I urge you, and I'm going to finish with this point. When you walk into an establishment where it's not clear to you who the certification is, or where you know there is no kosher certification, it's unsupervised, you are responsible for yourself. You're your own mashgiach. You're the kosher supervisor at the establishment. So while I will not say if it's unsupervised you cannot go there, because as we'll see, there are various circumstances and situations and establishments where you can visit, even though they do not have Kashrus certification. But I will say the responsibility belongs to the individual. Let's move on. What does somebody have to know in order to be a mashgiach at an establishment? And this is a repeat from the last class, but I need to go through it. There's really 3 concepts that you have to hold in your head. Number 1 are the ingredients of the food that I am going to consume kosher? Can I verify the kashrus status of the ingredients of the food that I'm going to be putting into my mouth? Fair? I think everybody understands that. Number 2, the kelim. Does the food, even if it's kosher, a very simple product which everybody knows is kosher, does that food come into contact with any kelim, with anything that's used to cook it, to mix it? Is it served on or in a kli, a vessel, a utensil that is not kosher? That's the second question you have to ask yourself. And the third question you have to ask yourself, even if the ingredients, and therefore the product is kosher, the kelim which are used to manufacture, to produce, to serve that product is also verifiably kosher, is the process used to make that food item in line with kashrus standards? Now the first 2 are relatively obvious. We all understand what I mean to say. The third, the process, will generally refer to bishul akman. Is the product in question, even if it's glatt kosher meat, cooked on a glatt kosher barbecue, that meat can be compromised and become treif if it's cooked by a Gentile? That's one example. There's also issues of Shabbos. Sometimes, if Shabbos is violated in a way, in order to cook a certain product, can I then eat the product? Does it retain its kashrus status, or does it become non-kosher? But that's few and far in between. So it's the product, that's the first layer. Then it's the kelim, the vessels, the utensils, that's the second layer of kashrus. And then it's the process, which is the third layer of kashrus. Okay? That's really all that one has to know in order to be a mashgiach and enter an establishment. So let's take a trip through various different establishments and we'll try this out. This cup is, I have to remember what I put in here, it's a carrot, broccoli, celery, vegetable juice that I got in Yorkdale at about 7:15 this evening. Okay, I bought it fresh from a store called Freshly Squeezed Premium Juices. Now, I did a little bit of research on the ideas of purchasing juices and various different drinks, of the variety of selection of products that they have from these juice bars, which is a relatively new concept. Relatively new, maybe not so new, but Booster Juice, Jamba Juice. I'm not familiar with all the different brands. But this store was called Freshly Squeezed. So I introduced myself to the lady behind the counter, and I told her that I work for a kosher certification agency. So she says, "Oh, kosher? Okay, you can buy this protein and this or that." And I said, "Whoa, you know, I'm here to explain to you what I can buy, not you can explain to me what you can buy." So she says, "Well, you know how many kosher people come over here?" I said, "Wow, It's interesting. I've gotten several questions on these kinds of things, but it's not like, everybody's asking. So she says, the bottom line is, so I can save you the whole research project. She says, the bottom line is, just make sure it's not dairy, and then it's kosher. So I said, wow, interesting. Okay, so she got that information from somewhere, and she didn't make that up. So, these kinds of establishments, although I'm not an expert in them, and far from it, I'm just beginning to learn about them, and the whole project is pending, and perhaps we'll put an article out it eventually. But they're clearly drinks that you can purchase, even innocuous looking, I don't know what this looks like, but the simple looking juices that you buy from an establishment like this, which are not kosher. It's not as simple as just put the fruits and vegetables through the blender and out comes the drink. It's not that simple at all. Really, the drinks would not be very tasty if that's all they would be doing. So I think that the first example of this type of approach, where I'm walking into an unsupervised establishment, I'm in Yorkdale, or I'm downtown at work, and I want to buy one of these juices, and I want to know, is it kosher or not? So the first thing I have to think about, is the ingredients in my juice kosher? So that's not an easy answer. There's at least 5 or 6 different types of drinks that you can buy at these kinds of establishments. There's the vegetable, there's the citrus, there's the fruit juices, there's the type that they put into the blender and they mix it. It has a very creamy kind of consistency. Help me out, what's that called? Smoothie. Very good. So that's these are the kinds of things that are available. Now, I'll tell you what I know. First, we'll start with the negative, and then we'll perhaps take it into the positive. I'll tell you what I know already, just from being in a store for 5 minutes. They use lots of protein powders. Okay, protein powders can be made out of whey, which is not a not kosher derivative of cheese, very often at least. You can't have kosher whey, but very often you have an unkosher whey. And there's other ingredients in a protein powder which would make it non-kosher. There's also fillers and bases. What do I mean to say? Well, she told me, very interestingly, that only the orange juice and the grapefruit juice are made on site. All the other fruit juices come in a box, and they hook them up to machines, and they look like those soupy machines, but they're juice machines. So I asked her, I said, why? What's the difference between orange juice and grapefruit juice and the fruit juices that come in a box? Well, she says, don't worry, it's not dairy. So I said, well, what is it? So she says to me, well, the drink wouldn't taste good if I squeezed lime, lemon, and who knows what into one mixture and just gave it to you. It just wouldn't have that taste. It's a formula. It's a formula. It's a preset formula. So they have to make the formula. What's in the formula? You tell me. I don't know. I do know that one of the companies that called us up for Hashgacha, one of these types of juice companies, when we asked them some questions, they told us that most of the fruit juices contain a base or a filler that has white grape juice in it. Most of them. That doesn't rule out all of them. It just means that you have to have seichel, and you have to open your eyes when you walk into these places. So it's not just a matter of, it's not dairy, it doesn't have whey powder. I'm assuming that's what the people meant. Or, I don't know what's wrong with milk, I'm not sure. But it's not just a matter of being par. You have to know what kind of ingredients are going into these machines. Okay, now even this, which I said, I tried to push it. I said, give me a product which is just the juice that you squeeze on site, that you don't add anything else into. So she had two options for me. Two options. One option was this. There was the vegetable option, we'll call it. And one option was the orange juice and the grapefruit juice. Okay? So she takes my vegetables. There's the carrots, the broccoli. I ordered broccoli because I always wanted to try broccoli. But there was the broccoli and the celery. So she takes it to the machine, and she's putting it in. I said, wait, aren't you going to clean that machine before you put my stuff in it? I don't want to taste, I don't know what else is in it. There was green stuff on the machine. You know, it's like what your blender looks like when you're finished using it. I said, come on, are you going to clean that machine? So she says, no, don't worry, you're not going to taste it. It's only a little bit. It's all vegetables anyways. I said, what else goes into this machine? She said, I promise you, it's only vegetables. There's nothing else that goes into this machine. It's only vegetables. So I said, okay, it's only vegetables. Now, I wasn't there long enough, and I didn't do enough research to be confident that that's the case, but it's possible. It's very possible. Very possible that this particular machine is only used for vegetables. And therefore, when we go into our second layer of kashrus, and we realize that the equipment, the utensils, the vessels that are being used to manufacture, process our kosher product are indeed kosher themselves. So it is very possible that this drink that I'm holding in front of you is kosher, but I will not drink it tonight. I won't. Because while I do know that the ingredients that were put in are vegetables are all kosher, but are the kalim kosher? I don't know, and I'm not certain whether that machine at that particular establishment is used for anything else. Okay, so this is a big, what we call a big sugya. There's lots of different types of establishments. There's lots of different types of machines. Presumably, they're all going to be different. And therefore, what we as consumers are going to have to verify before we go into that store and purchase that from that machine is that indeed is true. It doesn't take much to verify that. It's not for us, it's a huge project because we have to go into all the different stores. But for a consumer, you go once, you go twice, you go 3 times, you talk to them, you go to their website and you check it out. And you can determine whether that is indeed the case or it's not the case. So some people might ask me, but wait a second, you said that the ingredients are kosher. You said that the kalim are kosher. And certainly there's no bishul akum issues because there's no cooking process. But what about the bugs? You're always telling us that broccoli is bad. I don't say that, by the way, but that's what people say, I say. But, so why is it the case that you can have broccoli in the juice format? What happens to all those bugs that you say are in broccoli when I put it into the juice format? So to answer that question, the answer is as follows. A bug, which is juiced, is nullified in the rest of the juice. It's batel b'shishim. Okay, so even if it could somehow get through the processor, I don't know what goes on inside the juicing machine, but even if the tiny little bugs can somehow, or maybe a leg or an eyeball, would make it through that juicing machine, it wouldn't be a problem. Only a whole bug is not nullified in shishim, but it's a juiced bug is certainly batel b'shishim. So you would not have to worry about any toloyim. Now, one thing I will mention to you is that lemons are considered a davar charif. Lemons and limes are considered a davar charif. So if you go to an establishment and they're juicing lemons and limes for you in front of you, or even if you go to a hotel and you want a Coke and they want to give you a lemon on your cup, if that lemon or that lime is cut with a non-kosher knife, right? Remember the equipment? If it's cut with a non-kosher knife, because it's a sharp item, it absorbs from the non-kosher knife and it becomes not kosher. One of the big jobs of a mashgiach at a non-kosher banquet hall when we do events is to make sure that the bartender is not slicing his lemons in the non-kosher kitchen. he has to take it from the kosher kitchen. So that is one thing that you really do need to watch out for. And finally, and I'll finish with the booster juices, is that you have to watch out for grapes. Okay, grapes, once they're squeezed by a non-Jew, become not kosher. The wine becomes not kosher. So not only do you have to watch out for the grapes, you have to watch out for the machines that might have residue of grapes if they're squeezing grapes at that site. The site I was at today, like I said, doesn't squeeze, only squeezes oranges and grapefruits on site, because everything else you wouldn't be able to get a good consistency and a potent taste, because they're using bases and other various additives to enhance the flavor of the drink. So it is possible that you can walk into these places and get the orange juice or the grapefruit juice. Okay, again, assuming they're not using non-kosher knives. I mean, if they did have a knife at one of these kinds of juice places, you wouldn't have to assume that she also uses it to cut her sandwich during lunchtime. I mean, presumably they're only using it for fruits and vegetables. That concern sort of is more relevant in the hotel setting where they're cutting other things as well. But nevertheless, you should be careful with those items. So there are some possibilities. I'm not presenting the tzad heter very clearly because I don't know enough to present it clearly on a general basis. All I can tell you is that you can know enough, because you can go in, you can go onto their website, you can ask questions, you can determine and be satisfied that the ingredients in the particular item which you're ordering is kosher. The kalim don't come into any contact with any non-kosher, and therefore the item would be okay. So let's move on. Let's go to Slurpees. So everybody from all, I mean, since Slurpees were invented, everybody ate all Slurpees. There was no problem. The schools took you to get Slurpees. Everybody goes in to get Slurpees. What's the issue? So let's just think about it again. Let's think about it again from our new perspective. The ingredients and the kalim. Okay? It's also not a cooked item, so we can discard that point. Now, the ingredients. So Coke, Sprite, Pepsi, 7-Up. We know that all of these products are kosher products, right? But what about the blue ones and the red ones and all those kinds of things? So you'll say, well, I mean, there's a card, right? There's a card in the machine, and the card in the machine tells me which product is inside the machine, and I can go onto some websites, or sometimes the store owner will make it very convenient for me, and he'll actually hang a list which will tell me which products are kosher. And if it matches that little card and the list, then I'd be able to assume that the product, the items, the ingredients are kosher certified. So, the last time I was in 7-Eleven, in between Wilson and Lawrence, so I went to see what Slurpees they had. I brought my kids with me, so we had a choice of Sprite or Pepsi, and then a couple of other different colored things. So I go in to see, I want to see, what does the list say? Does it say that they're kosher? Does it say that they're not kosher? So I go and look in the list, and I'm thinking, wow, this looks very strange. I don't recognize this list. And then I'm thinking, wait a second, this list is from the old COR website that we haven't been using in the last 2 years, 3. Then I look at the date and I see 2000. COR's Slurpee list for the year 2000. I said, oh, that's relevant. Okay, so, then I want to go and see which Slurpees are kosher. So I go to the COR website and I say, where's the COR Slurpee list? And I can't find it. It's not on our website. So I said, okay, well, COR, they're not providing us with adequate services here. Who does provide, a Slurpee list? So I go to the States, and there are some Kashrus organizations that have Slurpee lists. Okay, now I'm going to tell you why the COR doesn't publish the Slurpee list and what the problem is. Okay, when you're buying a product, and this is halacha, the halacha is that if the container, which the kosher item is somewhat compromised, or it's not in the original container, you can't anymore assume that that product is the kosher product. So, the card tells me that it's blue Fanta. How do I know what it is? We'll get into the frozen yogurt stores in just one more second because they're even more problematic. But the Slurpee, the card says it's okay. I know because I saw on some list that it's okay. But how do I know that that blue Slurpee, which is in the Slurpee machine, is identical, is that product which they say it is? So now, when it comes to Pepsi, Coke, Sprite, and 7-Up, we have not yet found an alternative product which is not kosher. And therefore, there is no non-kosher alternative. So even if it wouldn't be Coke, it's just a generic brand of Coke or whatever, it's okay. It's not a problem. There is no such thing as Coke that's not kosher. But there's many other products. There could be Slurpees that are not kosher. Why? How could Slurpees be not kosher? Well, did you know that Dr. Pepper is kosher, but that Dr. Pepper Slurpee is not kosher? Did you know that? Why? Because Dr. Pepper Slurpee has an anti-foaming agent. Do you know what that is? An anti-foaming agent is the agent that they put in, and I'm no expert at industrial kosher supervision, but it's, the way I understand it, it's the ingredient that goes into the mixture to make sure that it doesn't foam up, right? Anti-foaming, so it doesn't foam up. It doesn't become an ice cube. It doesn't melt into water. It stays at a Slurpee consistency. So they have to add something to it chemically to make sure that this drink doesn't do what they don't want it to do. And that anti-foaming agency can be derived from an animal. And therefore, some are not kosher. So you do have to make sure that the Slurpee you're buying is kosher. So how do you make sure? So it is possible to actually verify it. If you walk into a Slurpee store, you can actually ask the owner to show you the container. Why? Maybe they dumped it into the machine and they threw it in the garbage? No. The way that Slurpees work is that the box is actually connected into the machine. That's how it works. The box has a little straw that comes out and connects into the machine, and the machine drinks out of the straw and it makes a Slurpee. That's how Slurpees work. So you can actually check and verify from the box. Let's say you didn't verify. So while we're very nervous to go out there and say, all of these flavors are kosher because we're afraid people are not going to verify, and we're nervous that to rely just on the store owner saying this is the product in my machine. Because the halachic basis to rely on that is somewhat weak. Now, there are agencies that do give out a list. So they hold that, yeah, you can walk into a store, you can walk into a 7-Eleven, you don't have to assume that they're exchanging the products. It's reasonable to believe that they'll give you what they're telling you that they're giving. That's certainly acceptable. But that's the issue with Slurpees. So again, Coke, Sprite, 7-Up, and Pepsi, so there's no alternative product. The other ones, ask your Rav. It's a halachic shaila. Can you rely? I'm going to take questions after, just for so that we go through everything smoothly. Ask your Rav. Can I buy a product which is out of its original container and I have no verification of where it came from if the store is telling me that it's kosher? The answer to that question is not necessarily no. And it might depend which store you're buying it from. Maybe it's a national chain, which will never compromise their reputation by giving you something that that something false. But maybe it's a little mom and pop shop that has a slurping machine and doesn't really care what you think and just cares about buying the cheapest product. So you do have to be careful, and that's a point of clarification that you need to clarify. Regarding coffee shops, so one of the items on the list was cold drinks, hot drinks. Just for the sake of saving time, I'm just going to combine everything. The COR's policy was, and still is, to say that any unflavored coffee or tea is acceptable to buy from anywhere. Any unflavored coffee or tea is acceptable to buy from anywhere. And we won't say anything else about any other drink in an unsupervised establishment. Why? Well, let's try to understand this. Coffee, tea, right? Unflavored. If it's flavored, you might have a problem with the product. If you know that the product has a hechsher, so it's the same status as an unflavored, it's fine. Because you went to the back of the Starbucks store and you saw the OU on the package, so it's beseder, it's fine. Now, what about the kalim that are used to manufacture these products? Do they come into contact with anything non-kosher? So the answer to that question is yes, they do. They do. While most of the equipment in a coffee shop is used exclusively for its own purpose, so a brew basket, which is used to hold the filter for a coffee filter, is only used as a brew basket to hold a coffee filter and can't be used to grill a ham sandwich. It's true. Can't be used for something else. But there is going to be random contact between this brew basket and other such similar kalim that are going to be at a coffee shop through the dishwashing process. Through the dishwashing process, which means that it's not used for treif every single day, and therefore, will always be used for treif, and therefore we have to run out of the store and we can't buy anything. It might have random contact with something that's treif. Now, again, you have to take a step back and ask yourself, can I buy a drink which is cooked essentially, right? And if you walk into your friend's house and they don't keep kosher, right? They don't keep kosher. They use their pots for non-kosher. And you say, oh, I want to use your pot to cook pasta, which you have there in your home, with an OU on it. Can you do that? You certainly can't do that. You certainly can't do that. You can't use something that's not kosher, even if it has once in a while contact. It only once became non-kosher because you accidentally touched milchiks and fleishiks with it at the same time. You still can't use that for something kosher. But there is a halachic principle that has to do with the 24-hour rule. And I don't want to make this a lengthy discussion, but what I will say is that kosher food, which has been cooked already on equipment which is not kosher, and where it's reasonable to assume, I sound like a lawyer, and where it's reasonable to assume that that piece of equipment may or didn't have contact with the non-kosher in the last 24 hours. Right? Sometimes you have a question. I accidentally put my milchik spoon into my cholent, and I call the rabbi and I say, what's the story of my cholent? Is it treif? Right? Most people call me with that question already threw out their cholent before they called. But if they didn't throw out their cholent before they call, I tell them, did you use that spoon for any hot milchiks in the last 24 hours? And if they tell me no, or they assume they didn't, then I say, okay, your cholent is okay. Your spoon you still have to kasher, but your cholent is okay. Why? Because that absorption of milchiks in your spoon after 24 hours becomes sour. Inside the spoon, it becomes sour. That's what our halacha tells us. And therefore, if you accidentally use that in your cholent, it will not have an impact on your cholent to make it not kosher, assuming that you didn't use it for 24 hours. That's the 24-hour rule. That's the 24-hour rule. So if somebody cooked coffee, not for you, you didn't ask them to cook coffee for you. You didn't walk into the store and say, please, can I cook my pasta on your treif pot? There's coffee available. The question is the coffee kosher when you walk into the store or not? So where you can reasonably apply the 24-hour rule, the coffee is kosher. Okay, so we will always assume that if the product is kosher, so it's unflavored coffee, it's unflavored tea, or it's a flavored coffee or tea which you know to be kosher because you verified it as the mashgiach, and it's equipment which is used strictly for coffee and only might have some non-kosher contact during the dishwashing process, so one can reasonably assume that the halacha allows us to assume that the non-kosher contact is 24 hours old and won't have the negative impact on the coffee, and therefore the coffee, which is already made, is kosher. Okay? But if I ask them, if I come to the store and say, can you make me a latte, please? So then it's the same thing as walking into my friend's house and saying, can I please have your pot so that I can cook pasta on? You're not allowed to take a non-kosher pot and cook with it. You're not allowed to take a milk spoon and use it, even if it hasn't been used for a year. You can't do that. What you can do is purchase a product which has already been made with equipment which one can reasonably assume hasn't been in contact with treif in the last 24 hours. So what that means in English is unflavored coffee or any other product which you can verifiably say is kosher doesn't become negatively impacted by the machine. But you're not allowed to walk in and say, make me that latte. You're not allowed to come because the wand or that little cup also has non-kosher contact in the dishwasher. Even in a Tim Hortons, you can't say, please add sugar, and then he's going to mix it with, you know that he's in Tim Hortons is going to mix it with a regular spoon, right? So you got to make sure to tell him, you know, give me the coffee in paper cup and mix it with or don't mix it, or mix it with a wooden mixer, because otherwise he's going to mix it with the spoon, and he's doing that upon your request, and that's not allowed. It's the same thing as asking somebody to use their non-kosher kalim to cook with. Okay, another item in a coffee shop. By the way, the cold drinks that you're allowed to buy in a coffee shop are the equivalent of the hot drinks that you're allowed to buy in a coffee shop. So sometimes they'll have iced tea, or they'll have iced coffee. So again, each coffee shop is different, but you've got to ask them, how did you make that? So you have the ingredient, right? You have that ingredient, and they added the ice, and it's iced coffee, right? Did you add anything? Did you not add anything? So potentially speaking, the iced coffee could be kosher. That's different than the slushy that's in the back of the counter that looks like a Slurpee machine that iced coffee comes out of, because a slushy machine might have an anti-foaming agent in it. You need to know that the ingredients that are put in that machine, it might not, by the way. We have a second cup kosher under certification in Thornhill that obviously doesn't have a non-kosher ingredient that goes in the machine, so very possibly it doesn't. You can't buy it unless you know that it doesn't, if you're buying from an unsupervised establishment. One more point for the coffee shops is the milk. Okay, now milk is what Kashrus agencies call a Group 1, which means kosher without certification. That's our code word. It's called Group 1, which means kosher without certification. So the question is milk, sometimes it comes out of a bottle, of a container, it doesn't have a hefsher on it, is it okay? So North American milk is okay, assuming you're not makbid on Chalav Yisrael, then the milk would be okay to buy. Now, creamers are different. Half-halves can have ingredients that are not kosher in them. A full cream usually doesn't, but the half-halves can. If you're makpid about Chalav Yisrael, you might have a different problem. Because some of the establishments, especially in the heavily populated Jewish neighborhoods, have Chalav Yisrael milk available. Now, the question is, if you're makpid Chalav Yisrael, you don't have to, but if you are you allowed to buy Chalav Yisrael milk from a container of Chalav Yisrael milk that's open? The seals are compromised, right? I'm just going to tell you a story that happened to me. When I go to visit a certain relative of mine who lives in the city, I like to buy him coffee, because that's what he likes. So, next to his office, there's a store, and the store sells coffee, and I like to go into the store and ask for coffee. And I asked, can you make it with Chalav Yisrael milk? And of course, they have Chalav Yisrael milk. So they bring out the Chalav Yisrael milk container, and the container is open. Right? It's that 2-liter container, and the ring is off already. I can tell it's open. So I say, do you have any closed containers? Just to see what would happen. So they say, okay, and they go back, and they come back out, and they say, sorry, we're out. I said, okay, so give me from the open container. Then the next time I come in, I do the same thing. And I come and I say, can I have some Chalav Yisrael milk? And they say, sure. They bring out an open container. I say, can I have a sealed container? And they go back and they say, sorry, we're out. Okay, so give me from that container. So then the third time it happens, and we do the same thing, and again, they're out. So I say, can I see the container for a second? And I looked at the date, and lo and behold, it was expired. Okay, so who knows what they were putting in there? I have no idea. But what I can tell you is Chazal knew what they were talking about. When they said, only buy from milk, they specify milk, from a container that has a chaysim, a seal, they mean only buy milk from a container that has a chaysim. Now, of course, even if it doesn't, okay, so the exchange was for non-Chalav Yisrael milk, so, okay, not so bad. But, nevertheless, Ma'aser Shahayir. Let's talk a little bit about the frozen yogurt stores, because we're trying to move on for time here. Frozen yogurt stores. Again, we have to think about it conceptually. Products, ingredients, kalim, and process. So again, a cold process. So we're not worried much about bishul akum. So just products and kalim, and equipment, and utensils that are used to make the products. So here you have a phenomenon. It's not a card in a machine. It's not a card anymore in a machine like the Slurpees. And why would they lie to you and whatever? How do you verify the products that are in that frozen yogurt machine? How do you verify those products? So you could do what I did, which is go to the back of the store. I flash my badge, COR here, and can you take me to the back? Fine, no problem. And we go through everything, and after an exhausting hour and a half, we find different things. Maybe yeah, maybe not, we're not sure. But you can do it. You can go to the machine, and the machine just says kosher. It doesn't say COR, it doesn't say anything like that, it just says kosher. How do you, as the consumer, know that the product is indeed kosher? So many of them, and they're more sophisticated than the little card on the machine, and they're much better at it than that poster from the year 2000 on the side of that Slurpee machine. They'll pull out an entire binder of different kosher certificates called LOCs. LOCs are letters of certification. Every kosher certified product in the world that's certified by a recognizable kosher certification agency has a kosher letter of certification assigned to it. because that's the only security we have to ensure that people just don't print their own CORs on just anything and just go out there and claim that every product in the world is under COR. Consumers can say, is this really kosher? Right? That ingredient doesn't sound too kosher. So let me call the COR, go on the website, and we'll check for a letter of certification. Is there backup? Is this product actually certified by COR? Has there been a certificate issued on the product? Every product out there has a letter of certification. That's how it works. So here you are with the binder in the yogurt stores, and they're showing you all the different types of things, and they're saying, yeah, see, this is kosher, this is kosher, this is kosher. So you're thinking to yourself, what does this binder have to do with this machine? I mean, even the cards at the Slurpee store were on the machine. And if I wanted, I can sort of say, can you show me the box? But what does this binder have to do with the product that's in the machine? So you might be intelligent enough to figure out that in most of the items there's a base, in most of the items there's a flavor. So usually it's made up of a base and one or two flavors. So a base plus flavor equals your ice cream. Okay, that's the formula for these kinds of things. So they're showing you all different types of certificates, and you're like, oh yeah, I know the OU. I know, wow, you have so many hashgachas. What does it cost you to have so many hashgachas on your store? And then you realize these letters are not hashgachas on the store. These letters are hashgachas on the products. How do you know that that base is the base that they're using? And even if, well, the base is called the name of the company, so it's probably what they're using, right? How do you know that the flavors that they're showing you are the flavors that they're using in the machine? And who verified that the flavors that are certified, right, even if those letters are actually what they're using in the machine, who verified that those kashrus agencies are reliable? I can tell you lots of stories. I really have lots of stories. Problem is I don't have lots of time. Okay, the answer is, halachically, you cannot assume that that stack of paper reflects what's in the machine. You can't api halacha. That's number one. Number two is, the fact of the matter is, there are problems. Whether it's a flavor that's, oh well, we used a different flavor from the same type of flavor, but from the other non-kosher company, which tastes the same because we ran out of that flavor. Or it's certified by a rabbinic certification that hasn't been in business for 30 years. These kinds of things have problems. My message is not that you can't buy a kosher product from an unsupervised ice cream store. There are many ice cream stores where you can buy kosher products from. For example, the Yogurty stores, when you buy a Yogurty bar, so you have the bar, the little bar, it's wrapped, it's in its original packaging. They open it in front of you, you can see the hechsher. And then they add in some frozen fruit, which you can either ask to see the hechsher, or you can assume that frozen fruit without any other ingredients is kosher, because that's true, it is a group 1, if it's frozen fruit without any ingredients. And then they blend it in that blender machine. And everything that goes into that blender machine, well, not everything. Sometimes they can put in powders into the blending machine, but you can ask them to clean the blending machine before your drink goes in there, before your yogurt goes in there. So that ingredient plus that ingredient into a clean machine equals a kosher product. Baskin-Robbins, right? Yes, the containers are open. But I think it's reasonable to believe that they didn't unload the Baskin-Robbins ice cream and put in Jack's non-kosher treif ice cream into that Baskin-Robbins container and try to sell it to you. It wouldn't be good for their business. But I think that already we can say is reasonable to assume. So you have to worry about, the scoopers, whether it's going to be transferred from one to the other. So tell them to wash it. Don't be shy. Tell them to wash it. And I think their policy is anyways to wash it. So In that situation, as long as you know that the ingredient is kosher and the scoopers are clean, then you can go and buy the product. So that wasn't my message, that you can't, there's no such thing as an unsupervised store that you can buy products in as kosher. My message is only simply, when you buy from an unsupervised store, you are the mashgiach. If you're the mashgiach, you have to be sure that according to halacha, you can verify that the ingredients are kosher and that the kalim that came into contact with the ingredients are kosher. I have about another 3 or 4 minutes of items that I'd like to share with you, but our time is almost up. Would you like me to continue? Yeah? Okay. And then I'll take questions, a few public questions, and then you can come to me afterwards. So, kosher for a traveler. We talked about Baskin Robbins. They have that in a lot of different cities. Group ones, right? The items that don't require hashgacha. So we mentioned water. Water is a group one. Now, you have different types of products that could fall into the category of items which you can buy without hashgacha. We mentioned water, we mentioned milk, right? Meat needs hashgacha, for sure. But there are items. Let's say, I don't know, you're in a supermarket and you see fruit salad, right? Cut up fruit in a supermarket. Can you buy that without hashgacha? So the answer is, generally speaking, yes. What do I mean by generally speaking? If you know that the fruit salad was cut in a clean environment, such as a supermarket, which would have a vegetable room and a meat room, and that's the way it works. They have separate rooms for everything. The knives, you don't have to assume that the knives had meat covering it when they cut the watermelon in half. So you can assume that those are okay, l'chachila, and buy a cut-up fruit salad. The only place which perhaps might be advisable to stay away from a fruit salad is, maybe in a treif restaurant. If you were ordering a fruit salad, and you might want to stay away from it. Even in that situation, you can ask your Rav, because in that situation there might be room to be lenient as well. Coffee on an airplane. So we said that coffee in a coffee shop is okay. What about coffee on an airplane? So many people have done different research projects, and is all the equipment that's used not kosher? But really, if you try to understand it, the same principles apply, which is that once the coffee is made and it's in the non-kosher equipment, assuming that the non-kosher equipment doesn't have constant contact with non-kosher food, one would reasonably be able to assume the 24-hour rule, and therefore say that coffee, unflavored tea, even on an airplane, would be okay. Water, etc. Somebody once asked me if they could buy sushi in a non-kosher restaurant. Right? It's rice, raw rice is kosher, raw grains don't need any hashgacha, raw grains don't need hashgacha. So there's the rice, there's the fishes, clearly orange. I'll even give them my knife. He says to me, I'll give them my knife to cut it, no problem. And they're going to roll it with seaweed, and either we'll make sure it has a hashgacha, or maybe there isn't a hashgacha with the nori sheet. There isn't a hashgacha problem with the nori sheets. There is a bug issue with the nori sheets, and they're toasted, so that's not clear either. The point I wanted to make was that rice is subject to the laws of bishul akum. Okay, so even if all the ingredients were innocuous and kosher, you'd still have a bishul akum problem, and that takes me to the cruises, because in the cruises some people like to prepare or have them prepare, even better, just fish. We're just going to have fish. We're going to eat fish on the cruises. A lot of people ask this. We're going to have just fish. And the fish, we're going to go into the kitchen and make sure it's kosher. It's orange. We're going to make sure that they wash the knives and they cut it on a clean surface. Why not? Right? You have to remember that, and then we're going to double wrap it, of course. It doesn't have any treif contact with any non-kosher ovens. and then we're going to cook it. You have to remember that fish is subject to bishul akum, and if a non-Jew cooks your fish, it's treif. So you would have to put it into an oven that's already on. Okay, so again, double wrapped, of course, and you verified it's kashrus and it's cut with clean knives on a clean surface. That would be a possibility for somebody who's going on a cruise. Okay, I think I'm going to stop over here. Yes?
Why wouldn't Coke and Sprite have the same anti-foaming agent problem?
I'm not sure if they use anti-foaming agents. Not all Slurpees do. But even if they do, many of them are kosher. Many of the anti-foaming agents are kosher. Many are not. So the kosher certification agency tells you that, you know, Coke and Sprite and whatever Bob's Coke are all certified kosher products, then there's nothing else. That's the present day assumption. Yes?
Sorry, can I just ask you to repeat the question
Yes, I
for
will.
the video?
What about a toast machine that only does toast, or an egg cooker that only boils eggs?
The question was, what about a toast machine that only cooks toast, or an egg cooker that only cooks eggs? But in what context? Where do you want to take that from?
Okay, so the bread's already cooked, they're just toasting.
Okay, they meaning
You're traveling and
you're traveling.
you're desperate.
Okay, so it's a good question because it allows me to comment on a point which I wanted to talk about. The question is, a toast in a toaster, eggs in an egg cooker from a non-kosher establishment. Okay, so the answer is that, let's think, bread, right? Is it kosher? You know that a lot of bread, even though in the old times bread was always assumed to be kosher, just pas palta or whatever, the non-pas Yisrael, today there are breads which are not kosher because they have whey in them. And they might be dairy. And dairy bread happens to be not kosher. If the bread is dairy, it's not kosher. So there's many breads that are not kosher. So the first thing you'd have to do is verify that the bread is kosher. The second thing you'd have to do is verify that all of the breads that ever went into that toaster are also kosher. So I think you'd have a tough time doing that. The egg cooker, so eggs are kosher, right? Assuming they're chicken eggs. We once had there are duck eggs, so some duck eggs are kosher, some duck eggs could be not kosher, yeah. But the point is, assuming that they're chicken eggs, and it's a egg cooker, and nobody cooks anything else in an egg cooker, you'd have to make sure that you were the one to cook it, because eggs are subject to the prohibition of bishul akum. I just want to take that comment and say that many people are very afraid of, you know, they go into a hotel or they go into a place that they're staying, and they don't want to touch or go near any of the cooking equipment that's there available for them, the little kitchenettes and whatever. It's not so hard to kasher a stove, and it's not very difficult to kasher an oven. And rather than taking the safe approach, one can. I mean, if you're afraid, then nothing I can do for you. But if you're willing to do it, just make sure the stovetop is clean. Turn it on for 10 minutes to the maximum, and your stove is kosher. Just make sure it's clean. Turn it on 10 minutes to the maximum, and your stovetop is kosher. Make sure not to use the middle parts because you don't want to kasher that or cover it or whatever you want. But the stove can be kosher like that. An oven, self-clean, easy. If it's not self-clean, make sure the oven is clean. Preferably make sure it hasn't been used for treif for the last 24 hours. Burn it out at the maximum temperature. Let it go for 3 hours, and you're good. Okay? Yes?
Sorry. Back to the topic with sorbets and anti-foaming agents. Is each anti-foaming agent directly related to the flavor, or can one anti-foaming agent be used for different flavors? And the reason I ask this is because can the anti-foaming agent for Dr. Pepper be used for Coke or Sprite?
Okay, the question is a complex question about industrial kashrus, which is how do anti-foaming agents work, and does the company, when they use the anti-foaming agent for Dr. Pepper, also use it for Coke and Sprite? The answer is I don't know, and the answer is, but I do know that if the product is certified kosher, then you have no problem with it. And if the product is not certified kosher, then you don't know if you have a problem with it or not.
Good for
And
them.
therefore, you should try to verify if the product is certified kosher.
Okay.
Okay? Yes?
The visual outcome is, if you turn on the stove or the oven, let's say for a nanny, that's okay?
Oh, you're going to have to invite me back for this one. Okay, nannies. The question was, is in the laws of Bishul Akum, is lighting a stove good enough to make sure that your your food that you're cooked is Bishul Yisrael and not Bishul Akum if the nanny's going to cook? It's a very complex question because there's so many facets to it, but I'm going to simplify it just to assuming she's somewhat supervised and you don't have any reason to believe that she's going to throw in treif ingredients, and assuming, and I'm not exaggerating when I'm telling you this, it's all truth, and assuming that you're not turning it on in the morning and walking and going out the door and only coming in at 8 hours later and just assuming that it's been on the whole time. Again, you're assuming that this is reasonable, that you've turned it on and now she's going and cooking and that it wasn't turned off in between. The answer is that according to the Ashkenazic custom, it does help. The Sephardic custom is a little bit more strict on these matters, but the Ashkenazic custom is that it does help, but you have to make sure that when you turn it on, it's a very, very important point, that the temperature that you turned it on to is enough, it's cooking temperature. So let's say 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you just turn it on to number 1, so I'll tell you how an electric stove works. It'll go on, right, to full power, and then as soon as it's hit temperature number 1, whatever that represents, it'll go off. And when it cools down, the thermostat will kick in and send it back on till it gets to that temperature again, and then it'll go off. Okay, so what happens if the stove is off and then the nanny goes and turns it up to 4? Right? It's off, and it's off for very long intervals in between. When it's on for short intervals. It's off for longer intervals when it's just on number 1. What's the halacha if, when the nanny actually turned the knob, the thing was off? So she essentially turned it on. Is it Bishul Yisrael or is it Bishul Akum? That's a better question. So the answer is, depends. If the stove is hot enough to cook something already, then even though it was off, it's still okay. But if the stove is not hot enough to cook something, then it's not okay. So you have to turn it on to a temperature which is hot enough to cook. And then you can allow the nanny to, assuming you're from Ashkenaz descent, you can allow the nanny to turn it higher or cook on that stuff. Yes?
With regard to fruit salads, is there a difference between like charif fruits like a lemon and an orange and a...
Yes, thank you for pointing it out. The question was, is there a difference between charif fruits and not charif fruits? The answer, which I mentioned earlier, but not in the context of fruit salad, if you have lemons in your fruit salad, then according to the halacha, you should not have it. What are some other sharp fruits? So orange was mentioned, that's not considered what halacha considers sharp. Perus chamutzim, which the Shulchan Aruch mentions as one of the items, fruit which is vinegary, as a sharp fruit, does not include, it does include lemons, it does not include oranges, doesn't include pineapples either. It might include, sour apples. Sour apples, like small sour apples might be included in that. Okay, but otherwise, the standard fruit salad fruit would be subject to the description which I described before. Yes?
Why would it be okay to use these ice cream scooper, which was used for non-kosher ice cream, as now in a coffee shop uses spoon, if in both cases you're using something which...
Thank you very much for asking that question so that I can explain it. What is the difference between that we are allowed to use the ice cream scooper, which is clean, I can use that for my kosher ice cream, but I can't use the Tim Hortons spoon for my coffee to mix my coffee, even though it's clean. And the answer is, and I didn't point this out, and I thank you for asking this question, that ice cream is cold and coffee is hot. So ice cream is cold, and therefore it doesn't extract any taste from inside the scooper, while coffee is hot, and therefore it does extract taste from the non-kosher spoon. Yes?
Assuming you're talking in some kind of case you don't do a official outcome, do you rely on some kind of vegan certification?
The question is, can you rely on vegan certification if we're talking about an item which is not subject to Bishul Akum? And the answer is, I don't know. The lady in the fruit store said that as long as it's parv, it's okay. So I disagree with that, and I think that it's possible to certify something which is vegan. I don't know. I'm gonna have to go to the audience for this one. Is it possible to certify something which is vegan that might have non-kosher ingredients?
Yeah, I know so.
Grape juice. Thank you. Bishul Akum, but the question was notwithstanding. Thank you very much. Our in-house vegan expert says, Richard, stand up and think about it. Grape juices could be vegan and not. So again, the answer to your question is fair question, good question. If you can verify that all the ingredients are kosher and there's no kalen problems, then it'd be okay. And if you can't verify that everything is certified, all the ingredients are kosher, and there's no kalen problems, then it's not okay. Yes, in the back.
In the States, there's a number of coffee shops that have good hatchers, and like Dunkin' Donuts. Do you eat there? And do you eat the ones that don't have hatchers because the products are...
If the question is, can you eat in a Dunkin' Donuts which has a hasher, and can you eat in a Dunkin' Donuts which doesn't have a hasher? So I assume you mean to say, since some of them have a hasher, therefore you can assume that the products in the ones that don't have a hasher are also kosher. Is that what you mean to say?
That's part of it. Can you eat the ones that have a hatcher are we supervised? Because the products, we don't know who's cooking the products.
Yeah, I don't know too much about Dunkin' Donuts. I could just say that there's a problem with your assumption. It's a good assumption, but there's a problem. Again, the assumption is, since you have Second Cup, which is certified kosher, right, and assuming it's a reliable kosher certification, and that's why you can rely on them and eat from a reliable kosher certification. If it's not reliable, you might want to think about it. Can you also eat from an uncertified? So the problem with that is that all the uncertified places usually do things which are treif, like ham sandwiches and other kinds of other services which are treif. And then you're going to have kalen issues. So again, I can't say for certain that just because one Dunkin' Donut is kosher, the other one is kosher. But even if you would say that that's true, which might be a fair assumption, you'd have the kalen issues in the uncertified ones. So again, you have to go into an establishment and understand. I mean, you can probably check the donut mix. I don't think anybody would say anything if you'd asked to see, is there a hechsher on the donut mix? And then you can see if it's kosher, if there's any contact with any types of kalen that are not kosher. You might have to go in there a couple of times. You might have to ask lots of questions. You might not want to do that. That's your prerogative. Yes?
What happens if you go to a coffee shop and you want your own flavored coffee and you say, you know what, we're about to make a new pot, can you wait 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
causing a problem?
The question is, good question, excellent question. Since I said that you are allowed to buy coffee which is already made, since the non-kosher kalen didn't negatively impact your coffee, didn't make it not kosher, but you're not allowed to ask him to go and buy a latte. You can't ask him to make you a non-kosher, a kosher drink on non-kosher kalen. What about if they're making a new pot? Okay, I believe, that they're not making the new pot for you. Okay? They're making the new pot whether you ask for it or whether you didn't ask for it. They're making it for anybody who comes in. Now, if everybody walks in as a frum Jew, that might be a different question. But, and that might be a more problematic question when it comes to the more kosher-friendly establishments. But let's assume, at least in a city like Toronto, there isn't really a store that most people who come in are kosher. So, assuming all of that, I believe that you can still buy that coffee. Yes, in the back. I'm going to take two more after this.
Okay, so two questions. Let's say you're in a supermarket and you want to buy a cut up fruit, right? And there's like a handful of raspberries sprinkled on top. Do I assume that the bugs walk off the raspberries onto my pineapple?
Wow.
Or can I assume if I just pick off the raspberries?
It's an amazing question. Question is, if you have a fruit salad that has raspberries, and the raspberries, assuming they're mochzik b'tolayim, let's use strawberries, because strawberries I can say for certain are what's called mochzik b'tolayim. Most strawberries have tolayim in them. Worms, bugs. So could you have to assume, can you just wipe off the strawberries and use the rest of the fruit? So you'd be surprised to know that that's actually a very complicated discussion that's discussed in the Gemara. For those of you learning Daf Yomi, it's the last Masechta in Shas, in Gemara and Nida, on Daf Gimel, whether one has to be machzik, isser, mimakom, lamakom or not. And it's a very complicated question. If the strawberries are washed, even if they're not washed to the extent that they're needed to be made kosher, and you might not want to eat them, but if they're washed, and therefore you have a very strong doubt as to whether there's still bugs on them or not, then the answer would be yes. Clean off the strawberries and eat the rest. If they're not washed, then I'm hesitant to allow them. I would not allow them.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know what the state of hygiene is in a Slurpee store? Like if I go and I buy a Coke, who's to say that yesterday it didn't have the blue man?
Yeah. You don't know. You don't know. The question is, what do they wash their things in between? Baskin Robbins, usually they wash in between. At least they dip it, and you can ask them to even wash it better. But in a Slurpee machine,
it would make a difference if the guy before you had asked for a non-kosher flavor. Like,
you're saying a Slurpee machine.
well, even Baskin Robbins, let's say two people before you asked for the non-kosher flavor, and then the one person, then they took that dirty spoon and they dipped it into your flavor. And
Fair
I
question.
went and I asked for my flavor, but it has the residue of the.
Fair question. Fair question. The question is, when do you have to be suspicious for leftover residues in your kosher products? Let's say in a Slurpee machine or in an ice cream container. The answer is only when you can see it. So if you can see it, then you can see it. Why is my vanilla ice cream have Rocky Road on it? Right? If you can't see it, then you can assume that even if it happened, sometimes I never saw this happen, but when I've said this before in public, some of the kids say, no, sometimes I take out the Coke Slurpee and it's blue. So, okay, if you can see it, then it's a problem. But if you can't see it, then even if it would be a small amount of residue that might, for argument's sake, be left there, it would be nullified, be butler. And one more question. Who should we choose? Anybody who didn't ask a question yet want to ask a question? In the back.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is if I order a mochaccino, even though all of the products are kosher, the fact that someone has they contact with something that's kosher.
The question is, if I ordered a mochaccino, I don't know what's in a mochaccino, but I assume you do. And there is somewhere where you could buy a kosher mochaccino, fine. Let's say that that's the case, I don't know. I assume that there is such a place. What about the equipment that it's cooked in? And the answer is you're absolutely right. If you order a mochaccino, there's no difference than walking into somebody's house and saying, can you please cook that pasta in your non-kosher pot, which everybody here understands, of course that's not allowed, and saying, can you please cook the mochaccino on those non-kosher equipment? I want to thank all of the organizers of this event. I think we were very successful tonight. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to come to me now. Thank you very much for coming, and